Lamin Yamal had always been known for her resilience. She was the kind of person who didn't flinch when life threw a curveball her way. Born in the heart of a bustling city, Yamal had grown up surrounded by the chaos of urban life. The sounds of car horns and the constant hum of busy streets were the soundtrack to her childhood. But amidst it all, she had always managed to remain calm and composed, two traits that would later serve her well in an unimaginable situation. At 32 years old, Yamal had become a mother, and her daughter, Imani, was her world. Despite the bustling city around her, her life had found a sense of balance between her work as a marketing consultant and her role as a dedicated mother. Every morning, she'd leave her apartment on the outskirts of the city and walk Imani to school, passing the old library and the corner cafe on their way. It was a routine she cherished, the familiarity of it grounding her in a world that often seemed uncertain. On that fateful day, however, things would change forever. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, casting a dull, gray light over the city. There was an unsettling tension in the air, one that went unnoticed by most. People went about their business, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Lamin had just kissed Imani goodbye, as she always did before heading to her office for an important meeting. She couldn't have known that by the time she returned, everything in her life would be altered. The city's largest shopping mall, where Lamin often took Imani on weekends, was a place of luxury and security. With its towering glass walls and high-end stores, it was an icon of the city's modernity. People came from all walks of life to enjoy the shopping, dining, and entertainment it offered. On that particular afternoon, the mall was busy with the usual rush of weekend shoppers. Lamin had just arrived to meet a colleague, but as soon as she stepped inside, something felt off. There was a certain tension in the air that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. As she walked toward the entrance of the cafe, the sound of hurried footsteps and muffled voices began to fill the hall. Within seconds, a man burst through the door of the cafe, a ski mask covering his face, his hands gripping a handgun. He was followed by several others, all similarly masked, their faces expressions of cold determination. Panic rippled through the mall. People screamed, rushing to the exits, some dropping their shopping bags in haste. Yamal froze for a moment, her eyes wide with disbelief. A robbery, in the middle of the mall, in broad daylight. The robbers made their way toward the jewelry store on the first floor, their guns raised, demanding that the terrified employees open the display cases. The situation escalated quickly. In the chaos, a security guard tried to approach the robbers but was immediately threatened with a gun. He backed away, his hands in the air, clearly terrified. Lamin's mind raced as she stood in the middle of the mall. There were children crying, women clutching their babies, and men trying to protect their families. She wanted to do something, anything to help, but she had no idea what to do. She was just one person in a sea of chaos. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her thoughts turned to Imani, her daughter was at school. But for the moment, the only thing she could focus on was what was happening right in front of her. In the midst of the confusion, the leader of the robbers, tall, broad-shouldered, with a deep, commanding voice, spoke. "Everyone stay where you are. No one move. This is a robbery, and anyone who tries to stop us will regret it." Lamin's eyes darted around the space. The guards, who had been stationed at various points throughout the mall, seemed paralyzed by fear. They didn't know how to respond to the threat in front of them. A few of them had pulled out radios, but the situation was escalating too quickly for any clear plan to take shape. Then, a shrill cry cut through the air. A woman had fallen, her child in her arms, caught in the stampede of people trying to escape. One of the robbers noticed her, and in an act of cold calculation, he pointed his gun in her direction. "Get up! Move," the robber shouted. But the woman, in a dazed panic, couldn't stand. The situation was spiraling out of control, and in that moment, Lamin's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she moved toward the woman and her child. She reached down, pulling the woman up by her arm, supporting her trembling body. They were close to the group of robbers, but Lamin's presence didn't seem to make a difference, they were too focused on their mission to notice a bystander. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible, I can't leave without my baby." Don't worry, you're not alone, Lamin reassured her, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Stay with me. We'll get out of here together. The woman clung to Lamin, and they began to make their way toward the nearest exit. But just as they reached the door, a gunshot rang out, followed by a shouted command. Stay where you are. Lamin felt her heart skip a beat. The sound of the gunshot sent a ripple of terror through the crowd, freezing them in place. The woman and child clung to her tighter, their bodies trembling with fear. The robbers were getting desperate. They hadn't expected such resistance, and with each passing second, their behavior became more erratic. One of the guards, a young man with a shaky hand, tried to approach them once more. He made it only a few steps before one of the robbers turned, pointing his weapon at him. You think you can stop us? The robber barked. You're no hero. The guards were powerless. The situation had become too dangerous, and despite their training, they were outmatched. The robbers were armed, desperate, and fully in control of the situation. The robbers moved toward the children's play area, where several families had been taking refuge, huddling together in fear. The group's leader addressed the crowd once more, this time his voice laced with a menacing edge. Everyone on the floor. If you want to live, you'll stay down and stay quiet. We're taking hostages now. Any attempt to move, and I won't hesitate to make an example of you. As Yamal stood there, her thoughts were a whirlwind. She saw the fear in the eyes of the children, the terror in the eyes of their parents. And then, one of the robbers shouted an order that would change everything. We're taking the kids. Line them up. The thought of the children being taken hostage filled Lamin with a surge of panic. She couldn't let it happen, not without doing something. As the robbers moved closer to the families, she knew that this was her moment. But in the midst of the tension, a thought formed in her mind, a daring idea. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. I'll go with you. Let the children go. Take me instead. Her words were met with a stunned silence. The robbers stopped in their tracks, confused. They hadn't expected someone to offer themselves up so willingly. Lamin's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall, locking eyes with the leader of the group. You want someone to hold hostage? Take me, she repeated, her voice firm. The leader of the robbers studied her for a moment, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. Then, he gave a sharp nod, signaling to his comrades. Fine. You want to be a hero? You've got it, he said with a smirk. But you'd better stay in line. Yamal's pulse raced, but she stood her ground. For the children, for the families, she would do whatever it took. In that moment, Lamin Yamal had made a decision that would change her life forever. What happened next, no one could have predicted. As Lamin Yamal walked toward the robbers, her mind was racing, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew the risks, but she also knew that she had to do something, anything, to prevent the children from being taken hostage. The fear that had gripped her moments before was now replaced by a sense of determination. She had made the choice, and she wouldn't back down. The robbers, surprised by her boldness, kept their guns aimed, their eyes narrowed, but there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. The leader of the group, a tall man with a gravelly voice, signaled for one of the other robbers to move forward. His eyes scanned Lamin as she walked toward him. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice cold and calculating. Lamin didn't hesitate. I'll go with you, she said again, her voice unwavering. Let the children go. I'm not afraid. The man gave a short laugh, his eyes glinting with both amusement and skepticism. You think you can stop this? You think you can make a difference? He asked, his tone mocking. Lamin met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just trying to save them, she replied. Her voice had softened, but there was no doubt in her words. For a moment, everything was still. The sounds of the chaos in the mall, the frantic screams and the thudding footsteps of people running for their lives, seemed to fade into the background. It was just Lamin, standing alone in front of these armed criminals, as if the entire world had shrunk to this one moment. The leader of the robbers nodded slowly, then waved a hand dismissively. Fine, he said, as if humoring her, but you come with us. You're not going anywhere. He motioned for the other robbers to clear the area around her. The tension was thick in the air as Lamin slowly moved toward the back of the mall, where the robbers had taken control. The other hostages, mostly terrified parents and elderly individuals, watched with wide eyes as she passed, unsure of whether to be relieved that she was taking the brunt of the danger or fearful for her safety. But Lamin's mind wasn't on herself. She focused on one thing: the children. She could still hear their cries in the distance, the soft whimpers of parents trying to calm them. She couldn't let them suffer any longer. She had made the choice to put herself in harm's way, but it was for them. As she was led further into the mall, the sound of the robbers' orders became more distant. The leader of the group pushed her toward a back storage area, where a few of the robbers had already begun securing the area, setting up barricades with stolen goods. Lamin felt a cold sweat on her brow, but she didn't show any sign of fear. Her breathing remained steady. "You'll stay here," the leader said, indicating a corner of the room where a few chairs had been dragged out. It was clear they intended to keep her under guard, and likely make a move to escape once the authorities arrived. They hadn't anticipated that the police would respond so quickly, but now that they had taken her, they were preparing for a standoff. As they set up, one of the robbers, a younger man, perhaps in his mid-20s, glanced nervously toward the front of the room, where the rest of the hostages were being held. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted his grip on his weapon. He clearly wasn't as confident as the others. Lamin saw his hesitation and knew there was a crack in their armor. "You think they'll really come for us?" the younger man asked, his voice betraying his unease. The leader didn't respond immediately, but the silence between them spoke volumes. It was clear that the group was growing more agitated. Lamin noticed how the tension was beginning to affect the robbers. Their nerves were frayed, and she could sense that their earlier bravado was starting to crumble. "Does it matter?" Lamin asked, her tone calm but firm. "You've already made your choice. You're here now. And you'll have to deal with the consequences." The leader turned to her with a flash of irritation, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a pawn in this game." Lamin didn't respond. She knew that arguing wouldn't change their minds. She simply sat down in the chair they had provided for her, keeping her eyes focused on the door, mentally calculating her options. She knew one thing for sure: the longer this went on, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. Outside the barricade, the sounds of sirens grew louder, the unmistakable wail of police cars approaching the mall. Lamin could feel her heart rate quicken, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to hold it together. She had to trust that the police were trained for moments like this. They wouldn't let the situation spiral out of control. Moments later, the door to the storage room swung open. A police officer entered, his face set with determination, followed by a few others. Lamin didn't flinch as they approached, but her gaze remained locked on the leader of the robbers, waiting for any sudden move. The leader gritted his teeth, clearly realizing that his time was running out. He shouted at his group, ordering them to keep the hostages in place. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, the room was a battlefield of nerves and uncertainty. "We don't want anyone else getting hurt," the leader spat, his voice rising. "We'll go out on our terms. Nobody gets to play the hero here." But Lamin wasn't afraid. She wasn't a hero. She was just a mother, trying to protect what mattered most. And it was her calm that helped shift the balance. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, almost as though she were talking to herself. "There's always another way." The leader hesitated again, his eyes flickering between her and the advancing police officers. In that brief moment, he made a choice. It wasn't a rational choice, nor was it one that made any sense. But in the heat of the moment, he dropped his weapon, his hands shaking. "Don't move," one of his accomplices shouted in disbelief, but the damage had already been done. Lamin's heart raced. The police quickly moved in, securing the robbers and releasing the hostages, all while the leader stood there, his defiance crumbling away. The other robbers, now with nowhere to turn, followed suit, their weapons dropped, their fight gone. In the aftermath, the mall erupted into chaos once more, but this time, it was the sound of relief, of families reuniting, of sirens fading away, of the danger finally receding into the past. Lamin sat in the corner, her breath shallow but steady. The police were clearing the area, making sure everything was secure. As she stood up, she was met by a police officer, a man in his 40s with graying hair. "You did a brave thing back there," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Lamin nodded. "I just did what I had to do." As she made her way toward the exit, she could see the faces of the people she had saved, families, children, the elderly, all looking at her with gratitude and awe. But Lamin didn't need any recognition. All she needed was to know that her daughter was safe. When she finally made her way to the front of the mall, she saw her husband, who had rushed to the scene upon hearing the news. He pulled her into a tight embrace, and for a moment, everything felt still. "You're home," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lamin looked up at him, her expression softening. "I'm home," she said quietly. "And I'll always be home, no matter what happens." It was over. The mall was safe. The children were safe. And Lamin Yamal had made the most courageous decision of her life, one that no one could ever forget. Thank you very much, see you in the next video.